Story 1. My parents were gone for the weekend, a rare event. They were at some fancy work retreat, leaving me, Dean, the king of the castle. Naturally, my first thought was party. Not a huge, wild bash, just a gathering of my closest friends. I figured keeping it smaller would mean less chance of getting caught. Plus, I actually wanted to hang out with these guys, not just have a house full of strangers. The music was loud, but not ear-splitting. We had a decent spread of snacks and sodas. A few of my buddies were playing video games in the living room, while others were chilling on the deck, talking and laughing. It was a pretty good vibe, exactly what I'd hoped for. Around 9 o'clock, I noticed a new face in the kitchen. He was older than us, maybe around 25, with shifty eyes and a worn-out baseball cap pulled low. I didn't recognize him, but I just figured he was a friend of a friend. You know how those things go at parties, people bring plus ones. He was rummaging through the snack drawer, which was a little odd. Most people just grabbed what was out on the counter. I made a mental note to keep an eye on him, but then my friend Sarah called me over to settle an argument about a video game, and I got sidetracked. About half an hour later, I was walking past the hallway that led to my parents' bedroom. Their door was usually shut tight, and locked even when they were away. They were super particular about their room. But now, it was slightly ajar. A cold shiver ran down my spine. That definitely wasn't right. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or maybe someone accidentally nudged it open. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I slowly pushed the door open further. The room was dark, but the streetlights outside cast enough of a glow to see that things were off. My mom's jewelry box was open on her dresser, and a few necklaces were spilling out. A drawer in my dad's nightstand was pulled out. And then I heard it. A rustling sound from the corner of the room, near the closet. My breath hitched. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the wall, looking for a light switch. As my fingers fumbled, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the guy from the kitchen, the one with the shifty eyes. He had a small backpack slung over his shoulder, and a couple of shiny objects glinted in his hand. My stomach dropped. He was robbing us. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking a little. He jumped, startled, and spun around. His eyes widened when he saw me, and for a second, we just stared at each other. Then, he lunged for the door. I reacted on instinct, throwing myself in front of him. We collided with a thud. He was bigger than me, and strong, but I was fueled by a mix of fear and pure rage. We wrestled in the narrow doorway, bumping into the wall, knocking over a lamp. I could smell something stale on him, like old cigarettes and sweat. He elbowed me in the gut, hard, and I gasped, doubling over. That gave him the opening he needed. He shoved me out of the way, practically throwing me against the dresser, and bolted out of the room. "Stop him!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet. The music downstairs was still blaring, and no one seemed to have heard the commotion. I ran after him, tripping down the stairs. He was already at the front door, yanking it open. "What's going on?" my friend Mike asked, looking up from the video game. "That guy. He was robbing us," I screamed, pointing after the fleeing figure. But it was too late. He was already out the door and sprinting down the street, disappearing into the night. My friends immediately stopped what they were doing, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "Robbing you? Who?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Some guy who snuck in," I said, my voice shaky. My hands were trembling, and I felt a little sick. I walked back into my parents' room, dreading what I would find. It wasn't a disaster, but it was clear he'd been through their things. A few small, valuable items were missing. The jewelry box was half empty. My friends were amazing. They helped me check the house, make sure he hadn't taken anything else. But the damage was done. My parents' stuff was gone, and I knew I had to tell them. Calling the police was a nightmare. Explaining everything, reliving the scuffle, describing the guy. They took notes, looked for fingerprints, but didn't seem very hopeful. "These things happen at parties, kid," the officer said, a little too casually for my liking. Then came the call to my parents. I was so nervous, my stomach was in knots. My mom answered, sounding cheerful. "Hey sweetie, how's everything going?" "Mom, something bad happened," I choked out. The cheerfulness vanished from her voice. I told them everything, leaving out the party part at first. Just that someone broke in. But then, as I explained how the guy snuck in during the commotion, I had to admit to the party. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. My dad got on the phone, his voice grim. "Dean, you know the rules. No parties when we're gone." I apologized profusely, but it felt hollow. They were upset, disappointed, and worried. They cut their trip short and came home that night. Seeing their faces, the sadness and anger in their eyes, was almost worse than the actual robbery. They ended up replacing the stolen items, but the feeling of violation, the disappointment, lingered for a long time. The party, the fun, all of it turned into a huge mess, and I learned a really hard lesson about responsibility and trusting your gut. Story 2. My college roommates, Jax and Carlo, and myself decided to throw a small get-together at Jax's parents' place. They were out of town for a week, visiting family, and Jax swore they wouldn't find out. "They never check," he said, "and we'll clean everything perfectly." Famous last words, right? We weren't looking for a crazy frat party, just a chill night with some friends from our classes. Good music, some cheap pizza, and a few board games. Jax's house was huge, with a big basement that was perfect for loud music without disturbing the neighbors. That's where we set up most of the party. Around 10 p.m., things were in full swing. The basement was packed, people laughing, talking over the music. I was helping Carlo refill the snack bowls when I noticed two guys I'd never seen before, lurking near the basement door. They looked out of place. Older than us, maybe late 20s, with hard faces and baggy clothes. One of them had a strange tattoo on his neck, a twisted symbol I didn't recognize. My gut told me something was off. I nudged Carlo. "Do you know those guys?" He glanced over. "Nope. Never seen them before. Maybe they're friends of Jax's?" I looked for Jax, but he was deep in conversation with a group of people across the room. I decided to keep an eye on them. They weren't socializing, just sort of scanning the room, their eyes darting around. It was a weird, unsettling vibe. A few minutes later, one of them, the one with the tattoo, walked up the basement stairs. His friend followed. I felt a prickle of unease. Why were they going upstairs? No one really hung out on the main floor during our parties, especially not strangers. It was usually just for quick trips to the bathroom or the kitchen. I excused myself from Carlo and quietly followed them up the stairs. When I reached the top, the main floor was dark. The only light came from the faint glow of the streetlights outside. The two guys were gone. My heart started to race. Where could they have gone? I crept down the hallway, my eyes straining in the dim light. Jax's parents had a lot of valuable art and antiques scattered around their house. My mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. As I got closer to the living room, I heard a faint clinking sound, like metal on glass. I froze, my breath held. The sound came again, then a hushed whisper. Definitely not Jax's parents. I peeked around the corner. In the gloom, I could see the two intruders. They were in the living room, standing near a display cabinet filled with delicate porcelain figures. The guy with the tattoo was carefully taking one of the figures off its stand, his friend holding a flashlight, illuminating the cabinet. They weren't just looking, they were clearly stealing. My mind raced. Do I yell? Do I confront them? They were bigger, stronger, and I had no idea if they were armed. My stomach churned with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I had to do something. This was Jax's parents' house, and these guys were just walking in and taking things. Taking a deep breath, I tried to make my voice sound bigger than it felt. Hey! What are you doing? They both spun around, startled. The flashlight beam swung wildly for a second, then landed on me. Their faces were grim, their eyes narrowed. The guy with the tattoo still held the porcelain figure in his hand. Mind your business, kid, the other guy growled, taking a step towards me. This isn't your house, I shot back, trying to sound braver than I felt. Put that down. The tattooed guy scoffed. Or what? Before I could answer, the second guy lunged. I barely had time to react, stepping back just as his hand swiped through the air where my face had been. He was surprisingly fast. I stumbled backward, bumping into a small table, sending a vase crashing to the floor. The noise echoed through the quiet house, momentarily startling them. That was my chance. Jax. Carlo. Call the police. I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping someone downstairs would hear me. The two intruders exchanged a quick look. The sound of my yelling, combined with the crashing vase, seemed to make them realize their time was running out. The tattooed guy quickly shoved the porcelain figure into a bag he had slung over his shoulder. "Let's go," he hissed to his accomplice. They both sprinted towards the front door. I chased after them, yelling, "Thieves! Stop them!" By this point, the music from the basement had quieted. People were starting to come up the stairs, their faces full of confusion. Jax was among them, pushing his way through the crowd. "What's happening?" he asked, his eyes wide. "Those guys! They were stealing from your parents," I yelled, pointing to the rapidly disappearing figures. They were already out the front door and sprinting across the lawn, disappearing into the darkness. Jax immediately ran to the living room. When he saw the open display cabinet and the broken vase, his face went pale. "Oh my God," he whispered. The party quickly broke up. Everyone was freaked out. We had to call the police, and just like with Dean's story, it was a messy process. Explaining to the officers how two random guys just walked into a party and started robbing the place was awkward. They took statements, dusted for prints, but held out little hope of catching them. The worst part was calling Jax's parents. He was so nervous, practically shaking. I stayed with him, trying to offer support. His mom picked up, and Jax stammered through the explanation. The initial shock, the disappointment, the anger. It was all there in his hushed voice. They were cutting their trip short, just like Dean's parents. Jax was grounded for what felt like forever, and his parents were pretty upset about the stolen items, especially the sentimental ones. It was a stark reminder that even a small party can go very wrong, very fast, when you're not careful about who you let into your home. The fun of the night was completely overshadowed by the fear and the consequences. Story 3. It was the end of freshman year, and my roommate, Jessica, and I were celebrating getting through our first year of college. Her parents were out of town for a weekend getaway, leaving their suburban house empty. Jessica, always the optimist, thought it was the perfect opportunity for a chill celebration. We invited a few friends from our dorm, about 10 of us in total. The plan was simple: order a ton of pizza, watch movies, and just unwind. Her parents' house was big and comfortable, much nicer than our cramped dorm room. We were all in the living room, settled on the huge sectional couch, laughing at a terrible B-movie, when I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't a sound, or a sudden change in temperature, just a feeling of something being wrong. Jessica's parents had a home office, or study as they called it, off to the side of the living room. It was usually kept locked when they weren't home, full of important documents and expensive electronics. I glanced over at the door, and it was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered Jessica saying her dad always made sure it was locked tight. "Hey, Jess," I whispered, nudging her. "Is your dad's study supposed to be open?" She looked over, then her brow furrowed. "No way. He always locks it." Like, always. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Everyone else was still absorbed in the movie, oblivious. We decided to check it out. Quietly, we crept towards the study door. The house was usually so quiet, and now every creak of the floorboard seemed amplified. As we got closer, we heard a faint, rhythmic clicking sound coming from inside. It sounded like someone typing on a keyboard, but very slowly, deliberately. My heart hammered against my ribs. It couldn't be one of our friends. They were all in the living room. Jessica and I exchanged a terrified look. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. We pushed the door open just a crack, peering into the dim room. The only light came from the computer screen on the desk, casting an eerie blue glow. And there he was. A man, his back to us, sitting at the desk, his fingers slowly, methodically typing on the keyboard. He was a complete stranger, wearing a dark hoodie, his head bowed. He wasn't looking at the screen like he was working, he was looking down at his hands, almost like he was just pressing keys randomly. It was unsettling. My breath hitched. This wasn't a party crasher. This was something far worse. He was in their private study, on their computer. Jessica gasped softly beside me. The man's head snapped up. He clearly heard us. He spun around in the chair, and for a split second, his eyes met ours. They were cold, empty, and devoid of any emotion. He was middle-aged, with a sparse beard and a gaunt face. He didn't say anything, just stared at us, a silent threat in his eyes. Then, he slowly stood up from the chair. He wasn't in a hurry, which somehow made it even scarier. He seemed to be in complete control. "Get out!" Jessica finally managed to scream, her voice trembling. The man still didn't speak. He just took a step towards us. That was all we needed. We both turned and ran, screaming at the top of our lungs, bursting back into the living room. "There's a man in the study. He's a stranger," I shrieked, pointing wildly. Our friends, who had been completely engrossed in the movie, jumped, startled by our sudden screams. The movie paused, and they all looked at us with wide eyes. "What are you talking about?" one of them asked, confused. "Someone broke in. He's in your dad's study." Jessica practically sobbed. Just then, we heard footsteps behind us. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the study. Everyone in the living room froze, their eyes widening in terror as they heard the sound. The shadowy figure of the man appeared in the doorway of the study. He stood there for a moment, just looking at all of us, a silent, chilling presence. Then, he calmly turned and walked towards the back door, without a word. No running, no panic. Just a slow, deliberate exit. It was the most unsettling part of the whole experience. "He's leaving," someone finally yelled. A few of the braver guys cautiously followed him to the back door, peeking outside. He was already gone, disappearing into the night. We called the police immediately. The house was in chaos. Our friends were trying to comfort us, but everyone was clearly shaken. The police arrived quickly and did their usual routine questions, fingerprints, checking for forced entry. There wasn't any. He must have snuck in through an unlocked door or window while we were engrossed in the movie. The scariest part was what we found in the study. Nothing was stolen, but on Jessica's dad's computer, there was a document open. It was a blank document, but at the top, typed in a simple font, were 3 words, "I was here." He hadn't taken anything, he had just made his presence known in the most terrifying way. It felt like a deliberate act of psychological terror. Of course, Jessica's parents had to be told. The initial shock, then the fear. They were horrified. They cut their trip short and came home, clearly shaken by the violation of their home. The police suggested they install a security system and be more vigilant. The party was ruined, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. For weeks afterward, every creak of the house, every shadow, made us jump. The thought of that stranger, just calmly sitting at the computer, typing those words, sent shivers down my spine. It was a terrifying reminder that even in the safest of places, you never know who might be watching, or who might decide to invite themselves in.